It's Youth Month, and while this month is commemorated in South Africa as one that carries a very rich history of courage, of bravery, it also carries with it a reminder that we live in a country where young people are the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, and continue to be amongst the most affected by economic injustices. Today, we break down conversations centered around the reality of what is currently happening in South Africa in 2026, from xenophobia, conversations about illegal immigration, conversations about what it means to be a young person participating in civic engagements in 2026. Today, we are joined by a man who has continued to have his footprint tattered all over South Africa's community development and community engagement, advocacy, and activism, with over a decade of experience within this field. He is the current ActionAid South Africa's country program manager, and here to break down these dire conversations, including what ActionAid South Africa does in response. Joining us today in this conversation is Mr. Sakhile Zungu, ActionAid South Africa's current country program manager, to help us break down the complexities of these conversations. Mr. Zungu, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Hi, Nzi, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Mhlawumbi, let's start the conversation unpacking. Before we unpack what is currently happening in South Africa, sinike kancinci i-background yakho. Utata Zungu is a man whom we know in our spaces to be heavily involved in spaces of activism, advocacy. Break that down for us.
Yeah.
How long have you been in this space? What inspired you to be here? And why advocacy,
Yes.
especially as a man in South Africa?
Okay, so Sakhile Zungu is from KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, born and bred in a place called Chelimnyama in Pinetown, Maranhill, a place I dearly love and a place I'm very proud of.
Yeah.
So I hail from there. Studied in university, in Durban University of Technology. So my whole grounding is KZN.
Yeah.
So in my early schooling years, particularly in university or towards university, I saw the need of people who are really committed in working with disadvantaged communities, particularly young people. So as a young person, and I know that it might be strange, I used to be in a hip hop group.
Okay.
And used to be a poet, particularly early years of university and, throughout my high schooling years. So whilst doing all of these activities, I realized that as young people, we did not have people who had succeeded or who were professionals that were close to us. We only had the criminals, the gangsters, either those who were into hijacking, cash in transit, heists, who were openly available to engage us as young people and, in a sense, mentoring us. And for me, it was quite strange to say, why is it that those who perhaps who had advanced in their careers, they would only come into the townships in the air-conditioned vehicles, windows up, come in, see their families, go out. So there was no communication or connection between them and us as young people growing up. And for me, it felt strange. So again, with that conscious mind, and as well as going into university, I decided, even as much as I wanted to go into business, and I was always passionate about selling something or doing something, and I was raised by my grandmother, who was someone who was selling things. So in as much as I was passionate or I had the drive, I thought, no, the biggest sacrifice I can make is to work in my community to bridge this gap that I was seeing. So cutting it long story short, post-university, I went into working in Child and Youth Development Center, working with young people. Whilst working there was an opportunity, to quit my job. I had to go and say to my grandmother, listen, and I quit my job and volunteer for a program that would be active in my community. So I was like, yeah, this is a great opportunity for me. And I quit my job, got it from a salary to a stipend, which was quite strange and very difficult.
Strange.
I wouldn't advise anyone to do that. But nonetheless, I quit my job and I started working for a local peer education program in my community. 10 years down the line, post, and I'd left KZN. I was in Joburg at the time doing a dialogue in Mthatha. And it was being broadcasted. And someone, just tagged some of the guys that were working at the Nelson Mandela Museum. That's where the dialogue was taking place.
Yeah.
And said, I know that guy,
No.
and this guy, I'm here where I am today because of this guy,
Beautiful.
because of that program that we're running in the community. And for me, that was precisely what I wanted to do. And I went back sometime back home, and I found that that program was still going on and was still running. And that basically defined the work that I've been doing and the work that I've wanted to do. So I've always worked with young people, in ending sexual violence in schools, which was one of the programs we used to do. Worked with Education Foundation on young people and education and so forth. So I've had plus minus 15 years in the civil society space, and specifically working with young people, working on policy issues, ensuring that young people are engaged on decision-making platforms. And basically that has always been my passion and still is, bringing young people into critical discussions and conversations about even today, but also about tomorrow as well. So basically that's the work that I've been doing. Yeah, that defines my career in this space. Yeah.
A very huge and very robust background, particularly, and very interesting one as well. I think bambalwa abantu abayang who would just leave umsebenzi that is profitable, a salary, uba mabayongena in a voluntary space, or receive a stipend. So that is very commendable. Thank you so much for that. Mhlawumbi, let us piggyback on the point that you mentioned with regards to the passion that you've had in ensuring that young people are on the table engaging in critical discussions. We are a country that is known to discuss a lot. We discuss in various ways.
Yeah.
Why are we still having conversations? Are they profitable at all in enhancing, advancing change? Are we conversing for purposes of venting? Are we conversing for purposes of using the process of conversation as therapy? Is there any tangible as a result of engaging in critical conversations?
Yeah. So it's a question that many have, to say, why are we still having a conversation?
Yes.
And sometimes why are we having a conversation about a conversation?
About a conversation.
So I think venting is important. It's how it diffuses.
Yes.
And the value of conversation is that it continues to ensure that whatever the struggle is about is maintained. Right? Because when if we deliberately stop having conversations about anything, then it loses the center of focus. And perhaps the frustration for many, and particularly young people, is when is the space for action? Because young people are action driven. It's not yes, we can have a conversation, but where to after that conversation? How then do we take that conversation into meaningful change? Because that's what young people want to see. They don't just want to have a conversation for the purpose of having change. Exactly. So what then becomes important about having conversation, dialogues, or whatever the case may be, workshops, is that we should put an action in that conversation, right? And perhaps conversations for me are important twofold. One is that I remember in one of the areas where we were implementing a program, and I said, you know what? I want to bring in people who disagree, because there's also something that we are guilty of as civil society, is that when we have dialogues, we bring people who agree with us.
Yes.
Then we talk about amongst ourselves, nod our heads, and agree that this is the best conversation ever, and then nothing happens. Because why? You're speaking to people who agree with you. Speak to those who disagree. So deliberately, I said to the team, let's bring all the people who disagree. Yes, we'll bring in our lot as well, but let's bring those who disagree. And we brought people who disagreed, and of course they disagreed.
Of course.
And there was huge havoc and chaos in the conversation. After the conversation, the local young people based there, so they came to me to apologize for the havoc and everything. It's like, and tried to soften it up. And I was like, no, that's exactly what I was looking for. And the reason is, and I said to them, listen, you might disagree now, right? And be vehement about whatever the point that you're putting across. But the little seed that we planted, when you go back home and you sleep, you will think about what we were saying, in as much as I will think about what you were saying. So that is where you begin to plant the seed of change. You're not going to change things by meeting those who agree with you. You need to meet those who disagree with your viewpoint, those who disagree with your principles. Those are the people, in fact, that you need to engage with in order to achieve change. So for me, that's the first part, that conversation is important. Then, like I said earlier, conversation become important because that is how we then plug into action. We cannot act if we have not discussed.
Of course.
What are we doing? So we need to know, what is the problem? How is it affecting us from different viewpoints, right? From different lenses. How is this problem affecting us? Where are the barriers? And who do we need to challenge in order to move this issue forward? Then how do we take this course of action forward? So conversation become important even for action itself. So for me, yes, conversations are pretty much still important, particularly on those two pillars. I
love that. Conversations that inspire action. Conversations with people who are not always at the table in agreement. That's the seed that drives the change.
Exactly.
Let's have a very controversial conversation, Mr. Zungu, about a conversation that is currently taking place, and it's a wave in the global community, of course, planted by South Africa in itself. The conversation is centered around the strife between Pan-Africanism versus xenophobia, or Pan-Africanism versus patriotism, rather. Let's have that conversation. You say that on the table, in order for us to have capacity to move forward, we need to leave room and space and hold space for different opinions, for different experiences.
Exactly.
The global community is currently declaring South Africa as a xenophobic state in various media outlets. South Africans at grassroots level, which is where we are at, are expressing a huge dissatisfaction towards a system that has enabled an influx of immigration that burdens an already dire system. This is patriotism versus Pan-Africanism. ActionAid is very set on driving the agenda of challenging injustices. There's the injustice of South Africans who feel abused by a system that is meant to protect them. There is an injustice of people who are now, unfortunately, on the receiving end of the disgruntle of South Africans who feel abused by their system. What's your take on this conversation?
A tough one and a very difficult one. But it's one that we need to confront. But particularly if we are going to preserve our social fabric as a country and the social contract. And we need to then have a face-on discussion. And for us, I think the first point is de-escalation.
De-escalation.
We need to de-escalate where the situation is and where the conversation is. And I've seen that many of us within the civil society obviously will always look at the vulnerable, right? And will position ourselves to defend of Pan-Africanist versus patriotism.
Yes.
Because I think the two can coexist.
Yes.
Yes. And it's not a matter, in my view, of xenophobia and the hatred for South Africa or South Africans hating those
Black
who are not necessarily. Yes, Afrophobia. Yes. Perhaps if we may need to expand it. It's not as simplistic as that. Not to say that xenophobic or Afrophobic sentiment do not exist, right? And not to say that there are no legitimate concerns that are raised at the same time. And I think that because as civil society, our first instinct is to protect the voiceless. Yes. And that in this case would be immigrants, right? Yes. Or the most vulnerable.
Yes.
And therefore the reaction becomes, because there's a march, against illegal migration or undocumented migrants, then there is going to be a response, a march against xenophobia or Afrophobia. So it's a match for a match in a way. So it's reactive.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that we have taken the time to really think about what are the issues and how then to engage on the issues in a constructive conversation that brings everybody into the room. I've seen some public affairs shows where they bring the patriots, if we may call it that, or the xenophobes, or whatever the case may be,
lack of better words,
and the Pan-Africanists and civil society into the same room. But they are arguing over each other, and no one is actually listening for the purpose of engaging, understanding and engaging in terms of your response. It's how smartly I can diffuse what you are saying. So it's me versus you, your point versus my point. And it's not about how, at the end of the day, do we rebuild our society? How do we build social cohesion between ourselves and our African brothers, and sisters? So I think that we need to de-escalate the conversation and get to a point where we are listening to each other and create a pathway or a platform where there can be engagement. Otherwise, what we're going to find is that you are going to have others marching on the right and others marching on the left. Now, the issue then becomes, these ones have started marching since January. We, as civil society, we're starting now. When are you going to catch up? So, and what then becomes the solution? Because what you're going to have is that you are going to have communities rising against each other. We are going to mobilize on the left. They are going to mobilize on the right. And it becomes what? Commotion. The other thing that I'm also seeing, that I still want to engage a few other minds on this one. I've looked at how the state has responded to this issue, right? And for me, at the crux of it is the failure of the state, right? Besides, let's leave the issues that are arising at the moment. And for us to get to this point, it's a total failure of the state. But anyway, let's put that point aside for a second. So I've been quietly observing both ourselves as civil society and as well as I would say that the right-wing movements, nationalist movements, anti-migrant movements, and so forth. And I've watched the state. So at first, it was disjointed, disorganized. The presidency was saying something else. We had the premier of Gauteng coming to support one of the marches, with the premier, I think, of KZN as well, supporting one of the marches. Then the state will then issue another statement from GCIS and so forth. And it's not a coordinated on what is the position of the state on the issue of government on these particular issues. So I've seen, since there was a meeting between March and some of the security cluster ministers, And I've seen a change in stance, in a more firmer discussion and a more firmer conversation about the positionality of the government, about taking law into your own hands, and about not encouraging violence and so forth. And this posture for me is a bit concerning in a sense, because we don't necessarily know what's going to happen 30 June that we've been promised.
Yes.
At the same time, it might be violent and it might not, right? That's just an assumption that we have. And we are seeing the panicking, people moving out of their homes. They are in parks. They are there. They want to be repatriated and so forth. And the other part for me is that we have seen the powers of the state being exerted on communities in Marikana. And I have not for me deduced that if the state fails to control this thing, we may have another Marikana
in a larger scale
in our hands. That's for me, right? And I'm not necessarily I'm hopeful that we don't necessarily have those
we are wrong.
10 of events.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at the state and how it's conversing itself.
Yeah.
How, you had a meeting of security cluster, all of those things, and in essence, that's how we had Marikana, But nonetheless, we will see how things unfold. But what I believe is that what we need right now is a de-escalation.
Yeah.
And we need to recognize the legitimate concerns of others and everyone within the space, not necessarily just one part of the conversation or the anti-migrant movements. We recognize them or legitimize them, or us who are trying to protect the vulnerable, recognizing our voices and our views. Let us recognize everybody's view in the conversation. Then that is our point of departure in terms of how then we go into a course of action on this matter. But what I'm finding is that no one is listening to the other.
Yeah.
And that then creates a situation where you are not going to find common ground. And if you don't find common ground, you're not going to solve the issue, which might then escalate to a much bigger problem than we currently
quite a robust take and analysis, especially drawing from past experiences, historical experiences that are not really, in the far past.
Yes,
they were very recent.
Yeah.
In Mhlawumbi, when we speak about democratic processes, we understand that protesting is part of the democratic footprint of South Africa, right? And my question then becomes, in a country where South Africans feel like their government does not hear them, refuses to hear them, even when they have legitimate claims, what is the threat to the current democratic system? What is the threat to the current government makeup, especially the government of national unity? So it's quite interesting, especially as we draw towards the local elections coming up in November.
So there's a huge threat. In fact, for me, I think we need another Fees Must Fall moment.
Sure.
Where young people drive the agenda. And I think that since the Fees Must Fall moment, young people have been depoliticized. And young activists, student activism, youth activism, for me, right? And it's an opinion and not necessarily a fact.
Correct.
That I've seen that there's been a loss of momentum and in young people really participating in decision-making spaces in the country, in driving the agenda. And I feel like this is the moment that we need, particularly to preserve democracy, our constitutionalism, because one of the biggest issues that we are facing is that also there's a rise in anti-democratic sentiments. In as much as we are seeing all of the other things that are happening, there's a lot of anti-democratic sentiments that are being shared. And we need to bring youth voices into the room, right? And really, for young people to value the democratic dispensation that we have. So with these anti-democratic sentiments and pro-benevolent dictator, whatever that may mean, sentiments that are on the rise, one thing we don't actually realize is that the fact that you have that view is afforded by the fact that you are in a democratic state, right?
Uh-huh.
In a situation of a benevolent leader or a benevolent dictator or whatever that shape looks like, you don't have the right of opposing or having a different view, right? So then we are pushing ourselves and perhaps even the exclusion of young people from economic participation, from education, and so forth, and all of the spaces that they would want to be a part of that they are currently excluded from, makes them feel as if there's no value in this democracy, right? And that's one of the risks that we are currently facing, is that then the apathy that we are seeing in voter turnout, particularly with young people in 2024, and obviously the assumption that we might have the same in the coming local government elections, all of that plays into this situation that we are finding ourselves in. But we cannot devalue. In fact, let me put it like this. I had a conversation with someone somewhere, I don't even remember who it was. And he had said to me, the black government has failed. And I said, no. Actually, he said, black people have failed at governing. I'm like, okay, what do you mean? And he says, but let's look at the last 30 years. Let's look at the ANC. And my question then was, does the government of the ANC represent all and every black person? Because the ANC has been in power, doesn't mean all black people have been in power. Does it mean that all black people that have the skills and the knowledge and the expertise to govern have been in the office of government? And he said, no. And I said, therefore, you cannot conclude that blacks or black government have failed. You can conclude, right? That's his opinion and my opinion, that the ANC has failed.
Yes.
Not black people as a sum total. So that's, and those are the elements and the risk that we find ourselves as. And also we must then remember that the conversation of liberation or emancipation has not been completed. Right? So political freedom did not translate to economic transformation, did not translate into land ownership and patterns of ownership, or even reform in terms of land. So there is still an incomplete story in our journey towards emancipation. So we can then not risk coming into a conversation where we are talking about the Africans as a whole as a failure to govern. Therefore, we need to give and hand over power to those who were in power before, who we know in terms of the brute force and the machinery of violence that they used against the people then, and we've learned lessons from that. So the risk that we find ourselves is that we then plant these ideas amongst young minds who are supposed to carry the struggle forward. And we find that now we are regressing. And that is why now we need then to reactivate youth activism, student politics, student activism around some of the issues, particularly the exclusion from the economy, issues around when we talk about the minerals in this country and why minerals, or we can even call critical minerals, which is the new gold rush that is currently taking place. Why are these minerals not used for industrialization, right? And of course, industrialization with an objective to respond to a crisis of youth unemployment, which is sitting at 66%, the highest in the world. In fact, I don't think any country even comes close to that particular number. And that becomes a risk, a risk not only to democracy, but it becomes a risk to the stability of the country. And these are the conversations that we need to now start having with young people at the center of every conversation.
I love that so much. Very quickly,
yes,
Mr. Zungu, piggybacking on your plight to bring young people into conversations that reignite their passion for youth activism. ActionAid South Africa just recently launched their 3-year strategic plan.
Yes.
This transpired, do correct me if I'm wrong, at the beginning of the year, February 2026. What are your current programs focused on in terms of addressing these matters of ensuring, number one, the reprogramming and reconditioning and reassociation of young people with the concept of democracy, what it means, why it's important, and why the fight for it needs to continue moving forward. But you're also bringing up a very important conversation centered around critical minerals. A young person sitting at home, Sakhile Zungu, has no clue what that is, may have no clue of what that is, but most importantly, may have no clue of why they should be bothered to even understand about what is the big hoo-ha around critical minerals. Let's address these two ends.
So, maybe starting with your last question.
Yeah.
We are a minerally endowed country, right? And one of the things that I've noted, and I had a conversation elsewhere, and I said, I'm looking at the room and we're having a conversation on critical minerals, but I'm not seeing young people, right? And for the longest of times, I think that young people have been brought in on tokenism in this conversation, right? To say, we have young people in the room and they're expected to say some of the most radical things. and everybody marvels at this, young people, there's hope. And then that's the end of it. And young people don't necessarily feel valued in that level of tokenism that we usually do in these conversations. And I believe that one of the things that we are going to do in our current strategy is really locating young people at the center of the conversation of minerals in this country. Because the driver of transformation and change rests right there in these minerals. They are our leverage. They are leverage for capital. They are leverage for transformation. And there's no way we can have this conversation in the absence of young people, right? And we want to then place them at the center of policy discussions. Because if you want to drive change, but you are not exposed to policy and policymakers, as we expose ourselves, you do a survey, get the opinion, then you say, this is what young people are saying. No. Let the young people speak for themselves. In fact, I would say let us capacitate young people, but I also feel that young people are capacitated. We may speak about extending, right, that capacity building amongst a broad church of young people, but not necessarily that young people are unaware of these conversations. They are just not at the center of these conversations. That becomes important for us. We do have the YGCC program, which is Youth, Gender and Climate, right? And again, all of this summarizes what we want to do. Work with young people, talk about issues of gender inequality and inequality broadly, poverty, and underprivileged. So talking about the eradication of poverty, right? And talk about issues of climate change, the just transition, the green economy. Again, young people in these conversations, end users, participants in discussion, but not drivers of these conversations. We don't have ideas of young people in terms of how do we drive this change when we talk about just transition. So for us, in the new strategy, is to every and any conversation that is critical in terms of the direction of this country must center around young people. Even as we walk into into the local elections that are coming, we are going to start youth and democracy dialogues, again bringing young people to the center. That is the first part of decision making. It's when you go to the ballot box. You can change the whole entire the whole entire government, or only by young people going into the ballot box, right? So I know that because we don't see systematic change. And sometimes we then ascribe that and say we don't see value in voting. It's because we have not voted for change, right? It's when you vote for change that you see the change, right? In whatever form or shape that it takes. then you don't see change in that change. That is when you can say, no, that this bullet thing does not work.
Yes.
So we have not tested it like other countries, in fact, other African countries who have changed even from liberation movements as leaders of government into other political formations, to test out the value of this democracy. So in the youth and democracy engagement, we are not pro or anti any political party. What we are then saying is that young people must use the power that they have of the ballot box to change the things that they are dissatisfied with, or the things that they are not happy with. And they must not go to the ballot box on the I would say on the value of a face, right? We're not voting for a person. But again, looking at the policies, looking at the manifestos of these political entities, which one is speaking to your issues, and how is it planning to change some of the issues that you are facing? So again, don't vote for a face, don't vote for a person, because basically this is what has been happening over the last many years, or even over the last couple of decades, is that people have been voting for faces, for names, as opposed to policies, to say this policy aligns with me, this policy does not align with me, and I'm making a decision on the basis of the ideas that you are putting forward. And I think young people, as part of these, will be examining and engaging. And one of the things that we want to do is to have a platform where young people examining and analyzing political parties' manifesto documents and engaging on that and analyzing and saying, this one is critically thinking about our issues. No, this one is not really matching up with our issues as young people. And start those conversations. Policy conversations begin at that level. Before we can go into the country's direction, to the country's laws and policies, we start at that level.
Lovely. Policy conversations start at this level. Thank you so much for this robust conversation. Perhaps as part of still recognizing the important month and the important day that today is, what is the final message that you have for young people as people to the rest of South Africa?
So reset at 50, which is 50 years since the young people or the youth in 1976 took to the streets with their mission and took action. And for me, the message to young people is that we need to craft our mission this year and take it to action. And part of that action must be to the ballot box. You cannot have a friend who's not going to the ballot box. You need to inspire, encourage everyone around you to say, we are all going to the ballot box. Who you vote for is your problem, but everybody must go to the ballot box. And that must be our mission at 50 this year.
Love it. Thank you so much, Mr. Zungu. Very insightful conversation, very thought-inspiring conversation. And I'm hoping that now ekhaya uyawabukela ababukela kuphela, you absorbed and that you're ready to go out and play your part. 50 years down the line from 1976, 16 June to we are in 2026 now. What are you doing as a young person to continue building on this legacy? It was such an honor and such a pleasure to be with you, having these conversations centered around matters that affect us. And of course, as it has always been said, power to the people, and the people shall continue to govern. Until next time, take care.